So now we're going to cover Module 49, which is mood disorders, focusing more specifically on depression and bipolar disorder. This is my area of expertise. This is what I studied in graduate school, and I went on to do my postdoc with Dr. Aaron Beck, if you remember, as the founder of cognitive therapy, where I specialized specifically in suicide interventions, but we also did work with a lot of people who had depression as well. So major depressive disorder is, or depression as we most often call it, is more than just feeling down. And it's more than just feeling sad about something. The other major mood disorder, bipolar disorder, is more than just a mood swing. We all have mood swings when we're feeling ups and downs, but the down part is actually a depression, and the up part is what we often call mania. So the criteria for major depressive disorder is that you have to have one of the first two characteristics plus three more of the rest. So depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, and or marked diminished interest in pleasure or activity. So this means that you're feeling down most of the day, nearly every day, and or you've lost interest and pleasure in things you usually enjoy doing. So, you know, you often used to enjoy playing sports, you no longer enjoy doing those things. Other things that you may see are significant increases or decreases in appetite or weight. You can see it either way. People eat too much, gain a lot of weight, or gain or lose a lot of weight. We also see people who sleep too much or sleep too little. People feel tired all the time, or they feel like as if they're moving in slow motion, or they feel like agitated. People feel tired or have loss of energy nearly every day. They're the cognitive symptoms of feeling worthlessness or inappropriate or excessive guilt about everything. There are daily problems in thinking, concentrating, and making decisions, and then reoccurring thoughts of death and suicide. Now, you only have to have three of the ones in black and one or both of the ones in blue. So just to make it clear, major depression is not just a depressive reaction. I mean, we all have bad things that happen to us and we feel down. But somebody who has major depressive disorder doesn't even feel good if something good happens. For example, you know, if you're having a down day and, you know, you see something funny on TV, you can still laugh. Somebody who has major depressive disorder doesn't usually even feel good when good things happen. So depression is everywhere. While phobias are the most common disorder, depression is the #1 reason people seek mental health services, and it appears worldwide, which suggests that it transcends culture. Per year, about 6% of men and 9% of women will have a depressive episode. So that's a lot of people. Basically, for women, that's 1 in 10 women across the world. Over the course of a lifetime, about 12% of Canadians and 16% of Americans will have experienced major depression. I don't know if that's the difference, why that is in terms of reporting levels or whatnot. So some people have said that depression is the common cold of disorders. So, you know, obviously if about 17% of the population is going to have depression, that is relatively common. But depression is more dangerous than the common cold because of the risk of suicide that's associated with depression. It generally has fewer observable symptoms, so oftentimes people are depressed and people around them may not know it. And it's more long-lasting than a cold. Some people can be depressed for their entire lives. It doesn't always just go away with time. It's not necessarily contagious, although there's some controversy about, you know, living with somebody who's depressed can actually make you depressed. And depressive pain is beyond just the sniffles. So you don't want to minimize depression because it's very serious. Bipolar disorder was once called manic depressive disorder, and you probably have heard that still used today. So bipolar disorder's two polar opposites are depression and mania. So people who have bipolar have both the major depressive disorder and they also have mania. And mania refers to a period of hyper-elevated mood that is euphoric, giddy, easily irritated, hyperactive, impulsive, overly optimistic, and even grandiose. A little bit of mania makes you feel wonderful. It feels like you're flying, you can do anything. Too much mania can make you psychotic, and that's when people often end up hospitalized. So when people are feeling in the down phase of bipolar disorder, they have all the symptoms of depression: pessimism, social withdrawal, lack of pleasure, no energy, difficulty focusing, problems sleeping. And when they're manic, they feel overly optimistic, hypersocial and sexual, delight in everything. They're impulsive and overactive. They'll have racing thoughts. They may go on spending sprees, purchasing things they don't need. They might be, they'll decide to paint their whole house in one night, and there's little desire for sleep. You can sleep 1 or 2 hours and feel completely rested. There is some evidence that people with bipolar disorder actually have a lot of creative successes, and some speculate that the depressive periods gave them ideas and the manic episodes gave them creative energy. So we know that Catherine Zeta-Jones has depression, Bob Geldof, among others, Ben Stiller is another famous person that They speculated that a lot of famous artists had bipolar disorder as well. There's a lot of controversy about whether children and adolescents can have bipolar disorder. And while we may see some of these symptoms in children, they've actually come up with a new diagnosis for DSM-4 called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder for kids that do have these kinds of mood swings. Doesn't necessarily and often does not go into a full manic episode, but it is a way for children who are, not adults yet to get help for, what may be premorbid symptoms. So why are mood disorders so pervasive and more common among the young and especially women? So you can see across the board, females have higher levels of depression than males globally. And part of it is that women might be more susceptible to depression because of biology. There might be some biological predisposition. It also might be that women, experience more stressors, or men just cope differently. Sometimes men are depressed, but we don't notice it as much because they use substances or become alcoholics. And so we see them as having a substance use problem rather than depression. So there are a lot of different symptoms of depression. There are emotional symptoms, cognitive symptoms, behavioral symptoms, and physical symptoms. So depression really, if you look at all these symptoms, I won't read them all to you, but you can kind of look at them. There are a lot of different symptoms of depression. These are more delineated in your textbook. But they really do affect almost all aspects of your life, like your sex life, your ability to concentrate, to focus at work, your ability to eat properly, maintain weight. So it becomes a vicious cycle. So why does depression often go away on its own? What about reactive depression? So while, sometimes time can heal a mood disorder, especially if the mood disorder is in reaction to a stressful event. However, a significant proportion of people with depressive disorder don't automatically get better with time. And I've seen people who've had it for their entire lives. They've always just felt like low levels of energy, depressed or down most of the day, nearly every day. So there is evidence that once you've had a major depressive episode, the likelihood that you'll have another one is increased because you've reached a certain threshold. And so people who have had one do tend to relapse and have another one in the future. And some people just have persistent low mood. One of the obviously most dangerous side effects of depression is suicide and self-injury. Every year, about 1 million people commit suicide. I worked with people who had recently attempted suicide, and many of these people are struggling with really serious issues in their life, and largely due sometimes to just not being able to problem solve or feel like they have somebody there to help them through these difficult times. They feel like suicide is the only option for them. They feel isolated and ineffective, and they don't see an end to their depression. So hopelessness is something that's very typical among people who engage in suicidal behaviors. Non-suicidal self-injury is also known as self-injurious behavior or self-harm behaviors. You'll probably know this as people who cut themselves, but there are other things such as burning. But these people do not have suicidal intent. This is more of a function of self-punishment or a mood regulation technique. So how can we understand mood disorders? So there's obviously a genetic predisposition, as we know that mood disorders run in families. There's some brain evidence, and there's also the evolutionary perspective. Usually the social cognitive aspect, there are negative thoughts, moods, and there's a vicious cycle of depression that we're going to talk about. So a mild form of depression might have actually had some survival value, because under stress, depression kind of allows us to hibernate, and just so we can conserve energy, avoid conflicts and other risks, and let go of unattainable goals, and gives us time to kind of contemplate. So for our ancestors, when there were times of crises, this was kind of a way for us to kind of take a break and step back. However, this is not useful in our society, and it causes a lot of stress, and which then, as you'll see, kind of increases the vicious cycle. There is also genetic evidence of genetics on depression. So there are areas that are linked on genes, and twin and adoption studies have also shown that twins reared apart are more likely to have depression, identical twins, even if they're raised in different environments. So if you look at the heritability of bipolar disorder, it's very biologically focused. So if you have somebody in your family who has bipolar disorder, the chances that somebody else in the family will have it are elevated. So if we look at the brain, we see brain activity is diminished in depression and increased in mania. So this is somebody who has bipolar disorder, so they're in a depressed state on May 17th, May 18th they're in a manic state, and then May 27th they're back in a depressed state. Now this must be somebody who is rapid cycling, because usually you don't move that quickly from depression to mania, but you can see the differences in the areas of the brain that are lighting up. People, the brain structure, we find smaller frontal lobes in depression and fewer axons in bipolar disorder. There might be issues in the communication among brain cells, so there's more norepinephrine in mania and less in depression, and we find reduced serotonin levels in depression, so that's why we give people SSRIs or serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So how do we use this knowledge to reduce depression? So we can attack the neurotransmitter imbalances with medication, we can increase serotonin levels with exercise, and we can reduce brain inflammation with a healthy diet, especially with olive and fish oils. So, there are lots of things that we can do to kind of get ourselves back on track. You also don't want to drink alcohol excessively because alcohol is a depressant. From the sociocognitive model, we found that depression is associated with low self-esteem, so that people discount the positive and focus on the negative. There's also a learned helplessness, so that there's a kind of a feeling that you cannot cope with life and you won't be happy. There's also rumination, which means that you're stuck and focusing on what's bad. Then you kind of see the world through depression-colored glasses, I guess. And so, and depressive explanatory style kind of predicts how we analyze bad news. So we see break up with a romantic partner. So somebody who is not depressed will say, somebody who is depressed will say, I'll never get over this. But somebody who, is more resilient can say, this is hard to take, but I know I'll get through this. So it's also global in that without my partner, I can't do anything right. People who have less depression will say, I miss my partner, but thankfully I have family or friends. It's also internalized, and our breakup was all my fault versus it takes two to make a relationship work and it wasn't meant to be. So on the left we see that results in depression, and on the right we see successful coping. So this is kind of the way in cognitive therapy we target some of these thoughts and kind of challenge them so that we can get them to look more like the thoughts on the right. So depression has a vicious cycle. So we have a stressful life experience, and then we have a negatory explanatory style, as we just saw, which results in a depressed mood, which result in cognitive and behavioral change. So you're less active, you're focused more on the negative, which then leads to more stressful experiences, less positive experiences, and the cycle continues. People who have depression tend to push people away from them because nobody wants to be around somebody who's depressed and doesn't want to do anything, and therefore people feel lonelier, and the lonelier they feel, the more kind of depressed they feel, and so it's a vicious